Delighted to say that joining me today is editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Morning to you.
Morning.
You were at the vigil last night. You are a journalist. You've attended a lot of things like the anti-asylum hotel protests and like, and you're there as an independent watcher. We had lots of TV cameras there as well. Let's just play a quick clip of what one peer, Lord Simon Woolley, had to say. He was among a number of well-known speakers, prominent figures who talk about race issues an awful lot. Diane Abbott, Dawn Butler, two Labour MPs included. And this is what Lord Woolley had to say.
This is tough for me, as it's tough for all of you and the hundreds and thousands of people in the UK and around the world who are appalled by the public assassination of Jason Arday. The lynching. The lynching.
You were there. You heard that speech live. I mean, I can understand. I mean, look, it's not a vigil I would have attended. But I can understand people who did feel strongly about this issue, about Jason Arday wanting to attend a vigil. They're entitled to do so. That didn't smack of remembering somebody's life, paying tribute to him or comforting his family, to me. Talking of assassination and lynching, what did you make of that when you heard it live?
Yeah, because I must have been stood about 10 foot away from Lord Woolley when he made those comments. And as you say, having a vigil for Jason Arday and some of the speeches that were given and some of the comments that were made, not least by Lord Woolley about their own friendship with him and
there were other people there who spoke who did actually know him.
Absolutely, spending time with him in his final days and how much of a loss it was for them personally. But it wasn't just a vigil, it was a kind of demonstration, it was a protest of sorts, and the message of it was very clear. It was that Jason Arday was the victim of an assassination, of a lynching by a racist mainstream media, and the problem with that is that it's untrue. And I think we should
Sorry, what?
From pointing this out. We all know.
I don't think you're even allowed to do that, Tom. I think you'll find the lanyard classes will get very upset if you point out that what is being claimed is not true.
And all you have to do is track back the story. I mean, the reason that Jason Arday became a national newspaper headline was because he was a very prominent academic, someone who I think it's fair to say looked for the kind of media limelight, and yet it turned out that his career was built on not just alleged plagiarism, also alleged academic fraud, falsifying data, which is something that has gone by the wayside a little bit in the discussion, but also a series of totally fantastical stories.
I mean, we'd never have heard of him if Cambridge hadn't lauded him because he was the youngest black professor at Cambridge University, one of the best universities in the world. We wouldn't have heard of him if he was a professor who was white, who was a, I don't know, Manchester Metropolitan University and a plagiarist. We wouldn't have heard of him.
Yeah.
And not because he would have been white, because of he was lauded because ... but also because of these amazing claims about his life, the marathons, the 5 million for charity, being a mute until the age of 11, being autistic, being illiterate until 18, all of having had a brain tumour for his exams,
and also having claimed,
none of which has been found to be true.
Also, which having claimed to have been the target of racist intimidation and violence, which again was not substantiated by the police or by any available evidence.
And which newspaper was the one that exposed that was not substantiated?
The Guardian newspaper.
The Guardian, a well-known racist right-wing newspaper.
And this is to the point that I take no particular pleasure in recounting this story in the wake of what's happened, but history is being rewritten. There were constant comments from the platform last night that he had been exonerated of plagiarism, referring to, let's face it, a pretty cursory examination of his PhD thesis from Liverpool John Moores University, who awarded it, who probably have a bit of a vested interest in making that story go away. And this particular claim that this was the work of a racist mainstream media, as you say, The Guardian, The New York Times, The Atlantic, these are all liberal left outlets who published, to my mind, some of the most devastating exposés of the untruths of Jason Arday. On top of that, the idea that The Spectator or The Telegraph or The Times, all three of which, by the way, got name-checked from the stage last night to boos and hisses and chants of shame on them, were pursuing this story not because Jason Arday was black, but because he had lied, but because
every time they looked into things, the next thing would be exposed. So someone on TikTok going, he wasn't mute, I was at primary school with him. I mean, he was chatty. He was chatty all the time. And other school friends going, no, he talked all the time. He wasn't mute.
The reason the story kept developing is because more and more was being found out. And
because he'd made so many claims.
I know.
And then there was a memoir that was published last week, which we understood lots of the claims in that, again, a memoir, autobiography, not true, but also we found out that the original draft made even more extraordinary claims.
And the details were changing from one to the other.
He even changed it, which cancer he claimed to have suffered from.
And to be talking about this now again is not to detract from the horrendous human tragedy in the midst of all of this.
For his family,
his family, his friends. No one likes to think of anyone, no feeling human being likes to think of anyone in that kind of dark place where they end up making the worst and most final of decisions. But we can't allow people to leap on this, I think in quite a shameful fashion, to pursue their pre-existing political agendas, one of which is to suggest that vast swathes of the country are riddled with racism when that is simply not the case, and in particular here to suggest that the press killed this man for racist reasons. That is
the allegation.
It's an outlandish, outrageous, despicable allegation, not least because it's not borne out by the evidence. People who are very close to Jason Arday, I wouldn't chide them for coming to their conclusions as to what happened, to looking to lay blame in certain places. That's a
people are angry, people are upset.
That's human. But when you see activists jumping on this, when you see people who previously have just always had an interest in, say, regulating the press, trying to use this tragedy as a soapbox, that I think we have to call out.
Good Law Project, again, they had this mass. They're the ones who organised the original letter. Some 17,000 of the great and the good signed it in support of him. Again, accusing people, claiming that he, questioning his role at Cambridge. This is weeks before he took his own life, we believe, but claiming that it was motivated by racism. Again, no basis. 17,000 people signed that letter, which I thought was an outrageous thing to do without any evidence whatsoever. But they now got another petition, and we've got 100,000 names for calling for a public inquiry into this. Lots of calls for, there's one basically calling for a limit on the number of articles that could be written about something. These are the people from Hacked Off calling for, Leveson 2, which is basically massive controls on the media. They're all joining in on this, and again, and asking for donations. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, some extraordinary stuff that is going on online. It seems to me, what I saw last night, I thought we are in Black Lives Matter's 2020 George Floyd territory,
100%.
where a man, George Floyd's death was absolutely outrageous. There's no evidence, interestingly, that he was murdered by the police because he was black. Actually, this police officer was a horrible, horrible human being who had done this to a number of people who were white, by the way, and there were black police officers involved in his death. But that was just taken out of all perspective. It was something that happened in another country, in another policing jurisdiction, and then was turned into riots here in 2020. The world was going utterly mad with lockdown. And we've had anyone, taking the knee, BLM this, BLM that, mainstream media completely falling quite literally on their knees. Keir Starmer, the then Labour leader, and his deputy, Angela Rayner, photographing themselves on their knees, police officers on their knees, basically treating a man who was a wife beater, a drug addict, a convicted felon, as if he were somehow a saint. The events for him, treating him in that way, is sort of, this is a horrible death and it shouldn't have happened, and quite rightly the cop was prosecuted, but treating it as something far more than what it was. And I'm seeing the same territory here. I'm not in any way saying Jason Arday is in any way equivalent to George Floyd, but Jason Arday, as far as we are aware, died at his own hand. That is very, very sad for his family and his friends. I would not wish that on anyone. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be exposing the truth where the truth can hurt people, because the reason the truth needs to be exposed was because of the lies that were told.
No.
And that, as far as I'm concerned, that is a matter that people need to rest with their own consciences. But if we are basically saying, which I think is what the message is, there can be no criticisms of anybody who is not white-skinned, because you're going to be accused of racism, or because someone might take their own life. We cannot criticise anybody. But I would love to know why it is a lot of the people who are saying these witch hunts can't go on. A lot of these people are the same people who have witch hunted people like J.K. Rowling, a powerful, rich woman. But, oh my God, they've tried to break her. She ain't going to be broken for the simple crime of saying men don't become women and women don't have penises. She's never written anything remotely transphobic. Doesn't, in my view, She's very lefty wokey. I doubt for a moment she thinks anything remotely negative about trans people at all, and has certainly never written anything. Their witch hunt against her, against pretty much everybody who refused to take the knee of the BLM, to play along with the trans madness, the witch hunts of people who stand up for Israel, witch hunts for people who well, climate deniers. No, I'm not denying the climate. I think people confuse weather and climate. The witch hunts that take place. I mean, I'm not a victim. Never claimed to be. Couldn't care less. You can send me as much abuse as you want. I don't care. It's water off duck's back for me. I've had it for 10 plus years. Doesn't affect me. It affects other people, though. There are other people who are much more upset by it. But the things that I get called. I mean, I've been called by one of my guests last week, so basically saying, likened to what Malcolm X saying, a white devil. Claims of people being racist, of being bigoted, for voting for Brexit. Baby killer, granny killer during COVID. Now I'm a baby killer in Gaza, and loads of people who share my views get the witch hunts. The attempts to shut people down. This has been going on from the very same people who are now saying, oh, this is terrible, the mainstream media shouldn't do this. And I do think the mainstream media need to stand up and go, no, I will not be called this. You cannot call... when they claim that this was a racist, witch hunt, assassination, lynching against this man, they are slandering every single person in the media who wrote those articles. It's an outrageous thing, which is exactly, by the way, what Jason Arday did with students who claimed that he wasn't teaching them properly, which he wasn't. They were accused of racism and marked down, calling the police on a journalist and an academic, sending Cartwright, the most expensive lawyers in the country, a very threatening legal letter to a journalist simply and just for doing their job. This is exactly the same sort of thing.
And I completely agree. The press need to stick up for themselves here, because what is being thrown at them...
Not always perfect. No one's claiming that.
This is a despicable slur to suggest that the only reason any of us pursued this story is because of racism. It's simply not true. Also, I think it's important to point out that if this story, or if these allegations, or if questions about Jason Arday and his own account of himself, if they had been listened to earlier, if that reporter at the Times Higher Education hadn't received both a legal letter from Cartwright, but also later on a call from the police confirming he'd been investigated for harassment, if the Professor David Harris, who started raising the alarm quietly to Cambridge, to academic journals, quite soon after Arday's appointment back in 2023, if Cambridge could have admitted that they had, let's face it, made a mistake here and for politically motivated reasons, we might not have ended up in a situation where someone who was kind of trapped in his own fantasy land was put on such a high pedestal to which he was always going to be knocked off. The press did their job because Cambridge and other academic institutions didn't do that.
Absolutely. And well, he should never have been appointed in the first place because he simply did not have the credentials for it. Even the ones he lied about, those credentials were not enough to put yourself in a position where you were a professor at Cambridge University.
And just on that very quickly...
Could you look at the last 10 people appointed to those similar roles? He's got nothing like the credentials. And
just on that very quickly, because one of the points that was constantly made last night was the going after Jason Arday is because they don't believe that we, i.e. black people, are smart enough to be at university, smart enough to be professors. You read the New York Times' report about this. It was came out just a couple of days ago. When he was put up for that position, first of all, he was up against, in the kind of interview process, people who were much more academically qualified than him, including 2 women of colour. When you go for the kind of celebrity DEI hire, you were often doing so at the expense of not just academics who are more skilled, but also other black academics who might just not have the celebrity factor, might not
don't have the great backstory about being mutant.
Or also, let's face it, would he have ever got that position if he was a sort of black conservative? I don't think, regardless of how brilliant he was and how illustrious his publishing record might have been, it's so clear what is going on here. This is not about race, this is about politics. And it's about the extent to which that has infected organisations like Cambridge, brought down standards and created tragedies like this, if we're being honest.
But I think it's a very, very good point. The idea that this is about, people not believing that black people can be... I mean, again, it's the bigotry of low expectations as well. From again, I don't think Jason Arday is somebody that should be raised as a hero or a role model in this country. I'm sorry. I think it's all a very... It was an intriguing story. It was a fun story for a bit because the claims were so outlandish as they were being exposed. And yet, people like us who've been fighting the woke for years, enjoying the fact that DEI was being exposed for the madness it was. And then when he resigned and he doubled down on the lies, you think, well, this is going to carry on. I'm very sorry that he is not here. I'm very sorry that his family are grieving. I'm more than sorry for his children. But that doesn't mean, I mean, the story is not a fun story anymore. It was fun. It was fun when it was ridiculous claims that were being defended on ridiculous grounds. But then it was absolutely not fun when there were racism allegations and the police and all those stories emerged. And it certainly became a very serious story when he took his own life. And no one's pretending anything different. But to claim that it was a lynching, to claim that it was an assassination is so deeply worrying. And I'm telling you, if that was a white man, not a black peer, Lord Wooley saying that at Trafalgar Square in front of a large crowd of angry people, I think the police would have got involved and said that was incitement of some sort. I think people would have legitimately claimed that that was something that needed to be possibly investigated. And I think that is very, very, very worrying. And that is not doing anyone in this country any good.